Okay, Year 11, this is Miss Ross Smith, and I just want to talk you through a couple of extracts to help you get ready for your literature exams next week. So first of all, this is from the first part of the play. It's the type of extract you might get, something quite short. It's always going to tell you at the top a little bit about where the extract came from, so you'll have an idea of sort of who the characters are, which will help under the sort of exam conditions. And it's always going to give you a starting with this speech question at the bottom. And this one is starting with the speech, explain how far you think Shakespeare, it's a keyword, presents, keyword, the witches as sinister in the play. And you have to do a little bit of language analysis of the witches in this speech, which is first bullet point, and the second one, which is in the rest of the play as a whole. So let's try and pick out ways in which Shakespeare makes the witches look sinister. And you might get a short extract like this, or you might get a very long one and just want to zoom in on short sections of it. So I'm going to zoom in on a couple of things and then I'll write an example paragraph. First of all, I think the stage directions are worth looking at. So right up here we've got thunder and lightning at the beginning. Now obviously the idea of a big storm as the witches arrive is something quite sinister and quite powerful. We mustn't forget that this is a play as well. Whoop, it's a bit wonky. And that obviously that would be something that from sort of behind the scenes and stuff, I don't know, actors and things like that could make seem really, really dramatic. There might be flashing lights and sort of rattling sounds and things like that. So that is sort of a bad omen as the witches arrive, because storms tend to be quite destructive and quite powerful. It could also be pathetic fallacy, suggesting that something sort of with the witches, something comes with them that is quite powerful and quite negative, which might link to the keyword, the idea of sinister, there at the bottom. Now, there are some other things going on here as well that make the witches look sinister and unnatural. So one of the things is that they seem to sort of talk in these funny fragments, and they almost seem to finish off each other's sentences. So there's a couple of short sentences here that do that. There's also the pattern they speak in, because it's the strange 8 syllables. I hope this one is in 8 syllables. So you could say something about the fact that it's iambic, tetrameter. So there's the letters there just to help you in mind. Iambic, tetrameter, that's the technique. Now, I think also at the bottom you'd probably want to zoom in on something like this, where the witches speak together all at the same time, like they've either practiced this or they can read each other's minds. That's quite sinister. And the fact that this is this kind of strange, kind of contradictory sentences, fair is foul and foul is fair, so it doesn't make sense. It's things that can't exist at the same time. So you could talk about, the contrast there. It's not quite an oxymoron, but if you did use language like that in the exam, you would be getting marks for the way you're thinking about the text. So that might not be a bad idea to think about, but I think I'd go with contrast. And again, we've got more here about the weather. It is foggy, it is filthy, it's hard to see what's going on, which means the battle is going to be very confusing. There's also a sort of strange sense that they know what's going to happen, they can tell the future. So any of those things you could look at to show the witches being sinister. So I'm going to have a go at actually typing a little paragraph while I'm talking to you, which I've not tried before, so it could go horribly wrong. And let's see how far I can get just with a kind of an example paragraph, trying to link some of these ideas together. So here we go. It would go something like this. In this extract and elsewhere in the play, the witches are presented as being sinister. That's an important topic sentence, because you're getting all the question wording in there as well. Then you'd need to go a little bit further. You need to start zooming in on some evidence. So I think I'd say something like Shakespeare presents the witches as being sinister through the staging, here using the weather to show that the witches' arrival is a bad omen. Omen. In the text it says, and then I go for my evidence there. I'd use the stage direction from the start, so I go thunder and lightning, enter 3 witches. Hopefully it's going to correct me there, and it did. And I'd start with that. And then I go on to say something like that, to perhaps recognise that it's a play, to get a bit of context in. So I'd say, here, capital letter would help. Here, the staging and the bad weather a sinister tone, so I'm using the question wording. The pathetic fallacy of the storm also suggest that the witch's arrival signals something supernatural and foreshadows something negative to come. And then you could, if you wanted to zoom in on one of those two, so you could say something like the word lightning suggests, sort of power, fire, energy, if you want to do keywords, connotations, meaning that the witches are a sinister and powerful force within the play. It's a little bit general, but I'm typing and sort of talking as I go. I think if I'd had a bit more time and I wasn't multitasking, I'd probably want to make that a little bit clearer. That's not a bad place to start. From here on, I think this is your job in the revision to sort of finish it off. Where would you go next? So you've got to get a bit of context in. So you could say something about the supernatural and the fact that people in the 17th century were really, really paranoid and the witches would have frightened them a lot, so that would work. Also the fact that Macbeth and Banquo are very frightened of the witches when they first see them and don't understand what the witches are. They look like inhabitants of the earth, but they're not. Macbeth thinks that they might be women, but the beards forbid him to think so. And just there in those few lines, you've got some quotes from the rest of the play, so you could explore their reactions to the witches. And that would give you sort of witches in the rest of the play. Keep using the question wording. Keep going back to the ideas of the witches being presented by Shakespeare as sinister. That would be a good way of carrying that on. Then I think I'd need a second point to go back to the extract to make sure the examiner knows that wasn't a fluke and I did understand the extract. I think then I'd probably say something about what the witches are doing. I might mention the iambic tetrameter. It spelled that wrong. As a structure, I might talk about the fact they sort of finish each other's sentences. They're predicting the future. So sentences, future, anything like that. And if I was going to go with that as my second point for the rest of the play, I'd probably go to something like the second prophecy. I'd probably go to that Act 4 where Macbeth goes to see the witches and they say all those things to him that make him think he's invincible. So be bloody, bold and resolute, for none of woman born can harm you, things like that. Don't forget that's also in that nice little YouTube film, which is the South Park style 3-minute Macbeth. And there are the things that the Kardashian witches say that actually are quotations from the play, so that'll help you remember them. So I hope that was a little bit helpful. That's one way of going about it. I think your job now is to have a go at finishing that off, doing some planning and making sure you write really good quality analysis paragraphs. Make sure you're using evidence. Make sure you are using terminology wherever possible. So that's things like, if it's a simile, make sure you call it a simile. If it's so I can't spell terminology. If it's a metaphor, make sure you call it a metaphor. If there's some alliteration, talk about that. If there are things like sound patterns or image patterns, make sure you talk about those as well. And that should give you a very interesting answer. I hope that was helpful. Just before I go, I'm just going to show you all of that paragraph as best I can. Might not quite fit on the screen, but that might help you in terms of planning your own, so you don't have to keep re-watching it and re-watching it. Technical errors, bear with me. Oh, come on. It's not going to work.